Okay, welcome to the 11th common session of Sunoikis Digital Classics 2017. Today our guest is Professor Levan Gordeziani for the Tbilisi State University, and we will have a session about reading Herodotus in Tbilisi. As you know, this semester we have a common topic during the semester, which is about reading Herodotus in different countries. So this is a way for trying to read the same text in different languages. We had a session at the beginning of March, reading Herodotus in Arabic in Cairo. Then next week we will have another session about reading Herodotus in Tehran. And today we will read Herodotus with Professor Gordeziani in Tbilisi. Professor Gordeziani is a faculty member of Sunoikis Digital Classics since the beginning. He has been contributing to Sunoikisis many times, talking about Thucydides, last year about epigraphy and the work that they are doing in Georgia, and we have, of course, also other collaborators from Georgia. So, Professor Gordeziani, many thanks for joining us again today and for your contribution to Sunoikisis. So, welcome. Now, I think you can start.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Monica. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be with you again. It's a great pleasure for me. And very interesting for our colleagues to participate in this magnificent project. Now, this time we have speak about Herodotus in Georgia. So I will share now my slides. Is it functioning? Or?
Yes, I can see your screen. And now, okay, excellent. I can see the slides.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Tbilisi is a capital of Georgia, a small state at the edge of ancient civilized world. You see it on this map of Europe. This small country is Georgia. Here is a map of Georgia, and Tbilisi is the capital bit. So Georgia was connected with Greece and Greek culture and we have attested Greek presence in Colchis, Western Georgia, at least since 6th century BC, both by archaeological finds and inscriptions. The Greek settlement of Phasis attested as Polis since 4th century BC. Then, some later, we have Themistius, who studied rhetoric in 4th century AD. And in eastern Georgia, we have also Greek and Aramaic as official inscriptions in Iberia. You can see here on the map, in ancient times, modern Georgia was divided into main kingdoms. It's Colchis in western Georgia of Black Sea, and Iberia, Georgian Kartli, which gives a name to modern state we have today. So, in the last session, when I introduced our project of epigraphy, I have shown some inscriptions from Georgia. Now I will show only a few of them to show these connections between Greek world and ancient Georgia. Here we have one famous inscription from Tzreta. It's from Emperor Vespasian, who helped to restore the fortifications of Tzreta. Another famous inscription is bilingual, Greek and Aramaic. It was very important for the deciphers, the local version of Aramaic, which is found in Georgia. Here Yes, and we have not only Greek attested not only in inscriptions, in these official inscriptions, but all day in everyday life. We have very interesting Greek mosaics in different places in Iberia, as Colchis as well. And here is a very interesting thing, a unique one. It's a scribal set found in Tscheta. It's from 2nd or 3rd century AD. You see here the names of muses on this side, and or here on this golden plate, it's name of the king who was perhaps owner of this set. And here are three famous Greek poets, Homer, Menander, Demosthenes. It was now restored, this one, and you can see, I have shown earlier this before restoration, these figures, and now it's restored, and it's a picture taken in our museum this for 1 week. So in ancient times, Iberia was a part of Hellenistic world, and of course Greek was an important language. Then the Christianity came also with Greek language to Georgia, and in medieval times, Georgian kingdoms and principalities were under strong cultural and political influence of Byzantine Empire, and that's why Greek culture was alive in medieval times. We can see in ancient, in the 11th century Georgian chronicler, Leonti Mroveli, he was a bishop of Mrovi. He used not only Christian Greek sources, but we can see that he used also some other Greek sources. Of course, he has no citations, but the scholars who are studying his work have shown some that he had knowledge from different Greek authors of pre-Christian times. Plato was a symbol of wisdom, attested even in an epic poem, The Knight in Hunter's Skin by Shotaro Saveli in the 12th century. In some other historical or poetical works, you can see some citations or mentioning of some Greek names, Greek realities, and we had in our Institute for Classical Philology, it was a project, they made a site where the classical tradition in Georgian literature, and these all cases of mentioning classical names or classical some things in Georgian literature from medieval times to modern are gathered in this site, and if somebody is interested, it's bilingual, of course, Georgian in English, and if somebody has interest, can see it. So Herodotus in medieval times, it's not mentioned in Georgian sources, but from 19th century he appears in Georgian historiography. Georgian historiography of 19th century is of course connected with European via Russian and European studies and European science came via Russia to Georgia, and even in schools, in gymnasia, Greek and Latin was subject, and Herodotus appears different authors of 19th century. It was very interesting for Georgians because he has some information. We will speak about it some later. First Georgian translations of the passages of Herodotus are attested in works of Georgian historians since the early 20th century. And in the second half of 20th century, it's a huge project started in Georgian Academy of Sciences. It was the translation of all sources about Georgia, ancient as well as medieval and modern times. And in this series appeared the book of Untitled Chapter, Herodotus about Georgia in 1960. The same author translated the whole Herodotus some later, and this book, you can see how it looks. It's an academic translation with commentary and indices and so on. You see, it was published 75, 76 in 2 volumes. Also, we have original translation from ancient Greek, commented, and this translation was then used for different adapted editions of Herodotus that we have in last time. You see here is Herodotus History, a short version by Sofia Shermanidi. It was published in Military Library. It was a series for our military consists of 10 books, and in this series appeared a short version of Herodotus, as well as a short version of Thucydides that was translated by me. So it's 2007. Another, but in this case, here in this book, there are only these passages about military history taken from the original translation from Colchis. Another, again, series of world literature library. There are 100 books in this series, and about 30 are from ancient literature, Greek and Latin. And in this series appeared a short version. It was composed by Manana Phakadze. And Manana Phakadze prepared another edition of Herodotus. It's especially for children. So I was speaking about it in our planning seminar. Especially Kenny found it very funny that we have even Herodotus for children. And this short version for children was adapted by Manana Phakadze. First it was for her own grandchildren, but then the family liked it, the colleagues liked it, and University Press prepared this edition. And I can say that it's very popular in Georgia also. So, and we have another edition of Herodotus text, again, only what goes, where he mentions Caucasian tribes and territory. It's Encyclopedia Caucasus Antiquus. It's started in 2010. And in first volume, we have all the texts, and there are parallel translation, parallel text Greek and Georgian translation of Tinatin Hauptishvili in this volume. So these are translations of Herodotus And like to tell you about with two questions, I'll start with concrete information and evidence of Herodotus about Georgia, which, of course, in the center of Georgian studies. I want to tell you about Georgian alphabet and Georgian language, because it's both somehow connected with Greek-Georgian relations, and it's also important to understand how this translation functions. So Georgian alphabet, you see here, Georgian language has its own alphabet. And not one, there are three different versions. You see here Asomtavruli is the name of one, Nushuri, and Hedruli, the third. The modern one is Hedruli, we use. It's, we translate the names, it's for knights, for priests, and for princes. So this is its original alphabet, and the Georgian scripts were inscribed on the UNESCO representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity a year ago. And it's a question when this alphabet appears. The first inscriptions bearing a date are attested since 5th century. Some fragments could be dated to the 1st century, 1st or 2nd century AD. These are stones which were discovered by Levan and he excavated early Christian church. And these were secondary, the stones of secondary use by construction of this church. He dated them to the 1st or 2nd century, or they could be even dated to 3rd century BC, as Heinz Feinrich did in his Georgian history, and then in a new book about Georgian inscriptions. So the date of creation of the Georgian alphabet is problematic, and we have three different possibilities. There are 4th, 5th centuries after conversion to Christianity. It's Armenian tradition of Koryun, who writes that Mesrop Mashtots created alphabets of all Caucasian peoples, Albanians, Georgians, and Armenians, of course. This tradition has not much supporters today, because it's there are some problems in interpreting things that different alphabets were created by one person, and there are some differences in form, order, numeric and phonetic value, etc. And it's not easy to understand how it was possible and why one person could create three different alphabets. It was logical to create one alphabet and then use this one alphabet for different languages, as in Western world was the case, or even Greek was used by some other peoples. So this is for me problematic. 3rd century BC, invented by the first Iberian king Parnavas. It's a Georgian tradition of Leonti Brovelli, whom I mentioned already. But there we can't say that it's creation of alphabet. It's a typical story of creation of a state, and the king created some different things together with the state, and he invented writing. But was it Georgian alphabet, or it was an official writing in some using some other alphabet? Of course, it's not clear from the text, and it's one of the possibilities. And then we have also pure theoretical possibility. It's from 7th to 4th centuries, so before Alexander. But this possibility has some support in form, order, and phonetic value of the letters. What I mean, so in 3rd century, if it happens together with Hellenization of the ancient East, a Greek writing could be invented. There is no place to create something original and different from Greek. The times before Alexander, perhaps there was a better place for it, but of course we have no evidence. What I mean with form, you can see here is only one of these 3 alphabets, Hedruli, which we use now. I can show again the slide with all the 3. You see there are difference between these letters also, but they are very different from Greek and all other alphabets which were delivered, which were created from Greek, be it Latin or Kirillitsa. So the letters, the form of letters are not Greek, but the order is Greek, and you can see here that we have even V in the place of digama. We have some other letters. Of course, there are lots of them which are different from Greek and other European languages, but in the first half, it's the same order as in Greek, and even in case of chi, it's a Greek chi now, but it corresponds to the reading of chi in pre-classical and classical times. So these readings, phonetical value and order of letters, it corresponds to the Greek alphabet and of the first stage of the 7th century, but not of the 3rd century or of 4th century AD. Of course, there are different explanations for it. Can be that a person who was aware of Greek philology and of history of Greek alphabet could help in creating Georgian alphabet. But these similarities of Georgian alphabet with Greek of earliest ones is very interesting, and it supports somehow this theoretical possibility of creating Georgian alphabet in the period before Alexander. The first texts what we have, these are 2 inscriptions from the 5th century, original inscriptions, of course. One is from Bir el-Kut, mosaic inscription 430 AD, and Bolnisi inscription, it's a church in Georgia, 494. And we have from the second half of the 5th century, also the martyrdom of Holy Queen Shushanik between 476 and 483. This is the earliest original Georgian text, and you can imagine that it's understandable to Georgians today, and it's also studied in the school in 7th or 8th year. So of course it's not so easy for children, but they understand, and it's possible to teach this text at school. So in the 5th century we have the first Georgian translations of New Testament. The copies are of course much later, but we have some philological signs in the texts that they were created in 5th century and were written later. Of course, the translation of New Testament and some other Christian literature was the main purpose of invention of writing in own language in the whole region, also in Georgia. And after 5th century, we have attested many texts, inscriptions, and manuscripts, and so it was. At least since, and translations now, at least since 5th century AD, mostly in Georgian monasteries, we have this tradition of translation. Iviron is an Iberian monastery on the Mount Athos. In 10th, 11th centuries, the Georgian monks were very active in translation, and they are not only translations, but also theoretical works on translations in 11th century. And these are not only this theory deals not only with how to translate the sense, but also some specific of language, because it's for Georgia very important, because Georgian language is very different from European languages, and this translation from Greek to Georgian was always difficult. And even in 10th, 11th century, Georgian monks have thought about this, also from philological side of this translation, not only the sense. So the Georgian language belongs to Kartvelian group. Kartvelian is self-designation of Georgian, and in this group there are different languages: Georgian, Kartveli, Mingrelian, Laz, and Swan languages. So perhaps Georgian, this Kartvelian family is related to some Caucasian languages, and Arnold Chikobava, the theory of Iberian Caucasian family, he unites in this family this Kartvelian group and northeastern Caucasian, so Chechenian, Dagestanian, and northwestern Caucasian. These are Abkhaz, Adige, Cherkessian languages. No, for this moment, it's only theory, and even in Georgia, we have scholars who believe that this group existed, and we have another school which denies this possibility. Also, perhaps there are some related languages to this Kartvelian group, twin extinct languages of ancient Near East. There are several works on it. Of course, it's not a topic of our lesson today. What's different in Georgian and what's problematic by the translation from European languages? So, of course, there are many things. We can show these three main moments and differences. One is ergative case. It's a case of subject of a transitive verb in aorist. It has a special case. And while the case of the direct object is in nominative. In other, when object is when the subject is in nominative, the direct object is in dative, and Georgian has no accusative. It's difficult for European students when they study Georgian that there is no accusative, and this ergative appears in some situations. And not only for European students, but even for people who live in Georgia but whose native language is not Kartvelian, they have problems with these ergative constructions. And also I can say that we have problems with Georgian students, mostly with this case of accusative, because it's not in Georgian, and it's not easy to, or in Greek or Hittite or some other languages who have accusative, and we need to explain it, or have some problems that way. Then the verb can express the person of the subject, direct and even indirect objects. So it means that with one verb you can practically express a whole phrase. And we have this in some languages, but not in European languages, and it's also a problem. And it's a problem by translation, and you can imagine by alignment of Greek and Georgian texts, when one verb corresponds to 3 or 4 words in the sentence. So it's just not so easy to align, for example. Now I know that our colleague Maya Shokhashvili is in Leipzig, and she's working on alignments of Plato's translations, and I can imagine what problems she has with this Georgian verb. Also, I can say that the use of infinitive and participial forms is quite limited in Georgian, and in practical life you can see also that Georgian students who studied in Europe and came back to Georgia, they have much more participial forms that it's normally in Georgian, and it's also a problem by translation. In some cases, Greek or other European languages can much better express some ideas using these forms. And in Georgian translation, so if you want to show it correctly, then the Georgian is not so nice, but have while translating to think time to have this to find this golden balance between to say it correctly in Georgian and not disturb the sense which is in place. So of course, we have these all problems translating Herodotus. Now, I'd like to show this context by Herodotus, connected with somehow connected with Georgia and Georgian tribes, which are in the center of Georgian science, and of course they are created many times, but I think I can say something to it also what's from modern studies, and about some new projects that are dealing with it. So we can divide this information of Herodotus about Georgia in two. One is mythological contexts, and another is historical and ethnographical evidence. From mythological context, you know that Georgia and Colchis, Western Georgia, is a place of two mythological traditions. One is of Prometheus, and it's only one place in Herodotus where he mentions Prometheus. It's that Asia is said to be named after the wife of Prometheus. And Argonautica, Colchis was a goal of the Argonauts. No, and Herodotus mentions it in many places. So I use here English translation. And I show these main places where Argonautica is mentioned. So at the start we have this passage that when Herodotus speaks about how this confrontation between West and East started. He has this passage with Medea. But after this, they say it was the Greeks who were guilty of the second wrong. They sailed in a long ship to Aia, a city to the Colchians, and to the river Phasis. And when they had done the business for which they came, they carried off the king's daughter Medea. When the Colchian king sent a herald to demand reparation for the robbery and restitution of his daughter, the Greeks replied that as they had been refused reparation for the destruction of the Argive Io, they would not make any to the Colchians. And the second passage from this beginning, the Greeks first resolved to send messengers demanding that Helen be restored and atonement made for the Caesar. But when this proposal was made, the Trojans pleaded the Caesar of Medea and reminded the Greeks that they asked reparation for others, yet made on themselves, none gave up the booty when they asked. So this in the context of the beginning of this confrontation, we see that Medea, Colchis, it's a part of East of Asia, and the Greeks take her to Greece and won't give back to the Colchian king, and then it was an argument for Trojans that they didn't want to give back Helen. So another place, it's 145, the descendants of the crew of Argo were driven out by the Pelasgians who carried off the Athenian woman from Brauron. After being driven out of Lemnos by them, they sailed away to Lacedaemon and there camped on Taugetum and kindled a fire. They answered the messengers that they were Armeniae, descendants of the heroes who had sailed in the Argo and put in at Lemnos, and there begot their race. The Lacedaemonians were happy to receive the Armenia on the terms which their guests desired. The chief cause of their consenting was that the Tyndaride had been in the ship's company of Argo. Next place again, 179. The following story is also told. It's said that Jason, when the Argo has been built at the foot of Pelion, put a boat beside the hecatomb, a bronze tripod, and set out to sail around the Peloponnese to go to Delphi. Now, 762. The Medes in the army were equipped like the Persians. Indeed, fashion of the armor is Median, not Persian. Their commander was Tigranes Nachemenid. The Medes were formerly called by everyone Aryans, but when the Colchian woman Medea came from Athens to the Aryans, they changed their name like the Persians. This is the Medes' own account of themselves. In 793, there is a place of this gulf in Magnesia where it's said Heracles was sent for water and was left behind by Jason and his comrades of the Argo when they were sailing to Aia in Colchis for the fleece. Their purpose was to draw water from there and then to put out to sea. In 797. When Xerxes had come to Alus in Achaea, his guides told him the story which is related in that country concerning the worship of Aphistian Zeus, namely how Thamas, son of Aeolus, plotted Phrixus' death with Ino, and further how the Achaeans, by the oracle, bidding compel Phrixus' descendant to certain tasks. It is the descendants of Phrixus, son Kitisoros, who are created in this way, because when the Achaeans, by an oracle bidding, made Athamas, son of Aeolus, scapegoat for their country and were about to sacrifice him, this Kitisoros came from Aia in Colchis and delivered him, thereby bringing the gods wrath of his own descendants. So, how we sum up all these places in Argonautica. So Colchis, a real country on the east coast of the Black Sea, was the goal of the Argonauts expedition for Herodotus. In mythological contexts, it's mentioned as Aia in Colchis or Aia Colchis. You can see in these three cases. In Greek, it's as Aian ten Colchida, as Aian ten Colchida, as Aiest as Colchidos. So you can understand this in both ways, as Aia, a place in Colchis, or that Aia is the same Colchis. In Georgian translation, we have this second version. And I think it corresponds also to historical reality. Aia could correspond with Hittite Hayasa and Assyrian Diani. Places named in the region, so southeast coast of Black Sea. And some scholars thinking that this Aia was later connected with Colchis, could be this Hayasa or Diani state, which is attested in cuneiform texts since 15th or 14th century BC. This Hayasa and Diani in Assyrian texts from 11th and 9th century. And Colchis could be seen in Linear B, Kokideo, it's also 14th century, and Assyrian Kilchi. Both cases are disputable. I try to show in articles that there are possible readings, but of course, because of the script, Linear B Kokideo, Kolchideos is not the only reading of it. It could be, there are also other possibilities, and for the Assyrian word, which read as Kilchi, there exist also other readings. In many cases, reading Habchi seems to be correct, and only in the one case of Tiglat-Pileser's campaign to the north, it could be Colchis, but we can't be sure. And Kulcha is surely, this Colchis is surely attested in Urarti and Kulcha, both the localization and the name both be identified with Greek Colchis, which appears shortly after these Urartian texts. So, but when was this myth connected with Colchis? We see that for Herodotus, it's clear that the Argonauts came to Colchis, and we see that he has no other explanations, no other variants, as in some other cases. The myth, its heroes, and its geography is an organic part of Herodotus' cosmos. And we can see that he didn't give us some other versions, as for example with Helen, was she in Troya or in Egypt or so on. It's for him clear, and it's only he uses this Colchian thematic only to explain other things. Example, this Medea is a part of confrontation between East and West, and also that Medea gave name to Medians, so on. Of course, it's not so clear if Medians are from Medea, but that for Herodotus, it's the explanation of it we see. So for him, it's a part of his cosmos. The myth contains archaic elements which correspond to the eastern edge of the cosmos, but not to a particular location. So I agree with this statement by many scholars. Last time Tassilo Schmidt was in Tbilisi with lesson about Argonauts, and he saying the same. I agree that we can see some elements that were linked with Colchis afterwards, but when was the myth linked with Colchis? So we have, I think, two possibilities. The first possibility is already in Mycenaean times, in 14th century, and we have the first traces of Greeks in Black Sea, Mycenaeans in 14th century. Of course, we have no evidence of Greek presence in Colchis, but even from Colchis we have only a few bronze objects and some settlements, not so much. But a possibility exists. The Trojan excavations showed that already in these times the Greeks came to the Black Sea. And we have many of indirect evidence to link this myth with Colchis of the Mycenaean times. And the other possibility is at the beginning of the Greek colonization of the Black Sea in 8th century. And of course, it has sense, and I can say that there are elements, I personally see the elements of both in these myths of Argonauts. For example, this Aietes, my colleague Shota Satyani tried to show that Utupursi, the king of Diaochi from Urartian texts, a strong ruler in the region, could be the prototype of Aietes of the later Greek tradition, for example. But also I see some things which would be from Mycenaean times. So I think that in the myths, which was organic part of Herodotus Cosmos, we have some elements from Mycenaean times, and then from the beginning of Greek colonization. And in the 7th century and later, and by Herodotus, we see that they have, it's a common sense that the Argonauts came to Colchis. So, historical evidence. We have some places here in Herodotus where he lists some tribes which we connected with Georgia. So here, as the time went on, Croesus subjected almost all nations west to the Halys, for except to the Cilicians and Lycians. All the rest Croesus held subject under him. These were the Lydians, Phrygians, Mysians, Iandians, and Halyps. We see here these Halyps are generally connected with Kartvelian tribes, and but here we see Halyps in western Anatolia, to the west to Halys. Yes, it's a 30 days journey for an encumbered man from the Maetian lake to the river Phasis in the land of Colchi. From the Colchi, it's an easy matter to cross into Media. There is only one nation between the Saspires. To pass this is to be in Media. Okay. The Caspian is separate by itself. Its length is what a ship rowed by oars can traverse in 50 days, and its east, where it is broadest, is an 8 days journey. Along its western. No, okay, here he lists also some tribes in Caucasia. Here we can, from there, he turned around and went back home, and when he came to the Phasis River, the king Sesostris may have detached some part of his army and left it there to live in the country. For I cannot speak with exact knowledge, or it may be the sum of his soldiers grew weary of his wanderings and stayed by the Phasis. Here we have this famous passage where Herodotus speaks that Colchians are Egyptians. And he has very interesting argumentation, but I think it's now too much. We can go now to this. Here are the people, Georgian tribes listed in the 19th province, 18th and 19th satrapies. Gifts are also required to the Colchians and their neighbors as far as the Caucasus Mountains. So the Colchis were not in satrapy, but they were sending gifts. Now, a very famous place that I want to say a few words to it. The land where the Persians live extends to the southern sea, with it's called Red. Beyond this, to the north are the Medes, and beyond the Medes, the Saspires, and beyond the Saspires, the Colchians. Whose country extends to the northern sea, into which the Phasis River flows. So these four nations live between the one sea and the other. Here's the same list of the four. Here are some listed some Georgian tribes. So now shortly what we have from this historical evidence. Here are descriptions of various groups, localization, status in Persian Empire, ancestry, habits, armor, etc. We have seen Saspirus and Kolkhoi. Saspirus are perhaps the Iberians of later times. Iberia is not mentioned by Herodotus, but Saspirus appear there where Iberia of the later times is attested. These groups are mostly called so Saspirus, Kolkhoi, Chalibes, and so on, but sometimes the word ethnos is used for them. These groups are usually interpreted as tribes, nations. This Greek translation or English translation we use now, or they are called nations. But what does ethnos in the case of the population of South Caucasus mean, especially in 437? So, Herodotus was the first who stated the main characteristics of ethnicity with an account of what defines Greek identity: kingship, language, cults, customs, lifestyle, and we have take these three words with homo, homoaimon, homoglosson, homotropon. And it's not only, here's this place, 8144, from where we can derive this definition of ethnos, but also in other places we see that Herodotus uses it often, and he understands an ethnos not only Greeks, as in this place, but also for other nations. He has this kinship, ancestry, habits, and so on and so on. Language, of course, he uses it. And so for him, ethnos is, of course, what now for us, and what we can translate by the term nation. But the semantic scope of the term strongly varies depending on who it refers to, one's own or alien society. Moreover, we may distinguish between the self, the closely familiar other, and the other. And in the case of this historical text, I think we need this, because in the case of self and closely familiar other, Greek authors can use their own terminology in the proper sense. They use it for themselves. But in case when they are speaking about others, it's problematic how they understood it. In most cases, it designates this ethnos, a reality which corresponds to the proper meaning of the word, as it was understood by Herodotus, as I told you. But often he tells us a story of an origin of ethnos, tribe, people, nation, that seems unbelievable to the scholars of modern times. Sometimes the latest discoveries have partially proven these unbelievable stories. For example, the stories about Scythians have found some support in the last searches. But what can ethnos mean in this text? I think there are two other possibilities, not only the nation. The first is the state, and I remember a lecture of Otarlot Kipanidze where he said that else how could a Greek express an idea of national state? Polis, even Basileia or Arche, had more specific meanings, and in this case, where he listed Persians, Medians, Asperes, and Colchians, he means not these ethnical groups, but states. We can see it also another way, that it is a nation or population of a state subject to a ruler of a state. And this explanation comes from my knowledge of cuneiform texts, because I think that in cuneiform texts we have no evidence of pure ethnical designations. They have no words to designate what Greek ethnos means. They have only the population of a place, and even Asurayu, the Assyrians, it's a term that means a community which is connected with Assyria, but sometimes these are only Assyrian nobles. Sometimes it's a population of whole empire, but not purely ethnical Assyrians who are speaking Assyrian or have one ancestry. So, in other cases in ancient Near East, in cuneiform texts, we can't find this correspondence to Greek ethnos. And even the self-designation of Georgians, Kartveli, is also a derivative from the place name Kart. We can the Kart is a mountain in eastern Georgia. Kartli and Kartveli, these are places around. So Kartli is a place around it, the central Georgia, and Kartveli is population of it. And only in later times, this Kartveli was spread to the bigger population who were united by language and by liturgy in Georgian church. And the name of modern Georgia, Sakartvelo, it's a third derivative from this Kartli. And it means literally the place where the population of Kartli live. So in these self-designations of Georgians, you see this way that at first it was a place name, and the name of a people from this place was a secondary designation. The same we see in all ancient Near Eastern texts. And so I think that perhaps for Greeks and for Herodotus, ethnos, they understood the population of a country as one ethnos in some cases. And it could be in this passage for 37, it could be the case. So I think it's very interesting methodologically, and a young scholar, doctorand of mine, is now working on these national designations in Greek texts for Georgian tribes and for Georgian population, and I hope he will use some modern methodology from also digital by checking the text, and I'm very interested in results of his work. Perhaps it will help us to understand better these Greek texts about Georgia. So I think it was what I wanted to tell you about Herodotus, his translations, and the study of the problematic of Herodotus in Georgia. Thank you for your attention, and now I'm ready to answer your questions.
Okay, Levan, thank you very much. So this was really a very, very interesting session full of, well, things, starting from the Georgian alphabet, the language, and so on. I don't know if there are questions. We have people in the Hangout. Please ask questions. No questions? So I encourage people in the Hangout to, oh yes, Anise, please, a comment.
Yeah. Please.
I think she's writing.
Hmm?
Okay, okay. Okay, Anise. Yes, so, well, maybe I can, oh, I know, here it is. Okay.
Brazilian students of classics are not familiar with Georgian alphabet language and its place in Greek literature. Yes, of course.
Well, well, yes, it's not easy to...
That's why I try to present it, of course.
No, it was very clear, Levan. Thank you very much for presenting this, also to be aware of. Yes, it's true. It's a beautiful alphabet, definitely. It's very, very beautiful. It's peculiar. I know that I was in Tbilisi 3 years ago, and I remember it's beautiful to see, even if unfortunately we can't read it. But the interesting thing that, of course, there is a strong community in Georgia. At least this was my impression as a foreigner when I was there for the first time. And you can see, so you have been able to preserve your language and your alphabet, even if it's unique. So this is important. At the beginning, Levan, you said that the country is small. Yes, but you have this strong self-consciousness, and you have been able to preserve the alphabet and the language, even if it's difficult to learn. It's a difficult language. It's spoken and written only in Georgia, and as far as I know, is a difficult language to learn, and you show that. But still, so this is, I think, an interesting thing. And we also hope, thanks nowadays to this digital humanities community, that, well, in some way we can help to preserve these languages, and also the past, because you have a strong past. We have seen Herodotus talks about your country. You have an important museum in Tbilisi. So, in some way. So this is going back to the comment by Anise. I have a question about what you said about the translations into Georgian. You mentioned different translations, and definitely the one for children is very interesting, I think. So this is a way to help children to know the past, to love the past. It's not easy to read Herodotus for children, but in this case, it's interesting. And then there is another for including military sections. So, and when you say that you have short versions, I remember that you also produced, Levan, a shorter version of Thucydides, and now we can understand why, in the sense that basically, given these difficulties of translating the text of Greek into Georgian for the peculiarity of Georgian, maybe so these translations are not technically translations, but how can I say? Yes, summaries, shorter version of the text. This is what you mean when you say short version?
No, short version means that it was a project and they wanted a short version. It was short time. And that's
okay,
why
okay, for that.
But of course, you're right, in that sense. We have always a problem that proper translation is not easy to read in Georgian, and a translation that is easy to read in Georgian is not so, is already another thing.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, exactly, so, yeah.
This structure of language and how you can express the different things. And this not only in grammar, also in terminology, it's very difficult to translate. I know, for example, I have made a original translation from this Pericles word. And I needed 1 month for it. And for the shortened translation of how to get into Thucydides, it was mostly the same. So you can see that if you want to make it everything okay, to show all nuances of the text, it's another work.
Yeah, so I understand. So now we can understand. So the difficulties, and translating is always difficult in general, and especially translating a classical text into a modern language. And in this case, yes, of course.
This was this language structure.
Yeah, no, of course, because you show the language structure. And so that's why, so short version, of course, because you need time. And so if you want to produce something, and so short version in the sense that you select passages, specific passages, or you shorten the text?
Yeah, in different cases, for example, for this military series, it's shortened. There are only passages with battles and description of armor and so on. In this literary shortened version, it's a shorter text. For example, in my Thucydides, I have omitted some places which are not so actual for today, where he speaks about some people whom he knows personally, but then they were not so important in history. But of course, all his speeches and all these theoretical things, they are given normally. But likely shortened to have easy Georgian text.
Okay, yes, of course, in order to...
So you see, in the case of Thucydides, I have no numbers, because there are sometimes the whole passage is omitted with number.
Okay,
and
yeah.
It's only lightly shortened, and some very important passages, they are normal translation.
Yeah, especially the numbers in Herodotus, Yeah, I understand the problem.
Same with Herodotus. In this academic edition, of course, it has everything what it needs, but in the shorter versions, they are shortened for different purposes. And
okay, no, this is interesting.
Books.
Okay, now this is interesting too, for in general for translations techniques. And of course, you mentioned at the beginning the work that we are trying to do now in the digital humanities, so producing translation alignments. So the idea is to have alignments in different languages to produce also dictionaries. But in this case, of course, it's difficult. And it's always difficult to produce alignments because it's impossible to have one word by word alignment, we know that. And then in this case, you showed also the problem of this specific language. And Maya Shukoshvili from Tbilisi is now in Leipzig, and she is doing a great job. I know because she's working on Plato. She knows very well the text of Plato, and she's trying to do that. And one of the important things...
It's also translated, and they are very nice translations, very interesting.
Yeah.
I know her works.
Yeah, no, exactly. So she's a specialist. And in fact, one of her goals here is not only to produce the actual alignment, but to try to document it. So to explain how she is doing that and the decisions she's taking for the alignment, because of course there can be a disagreement among different translators, as usual. So an important thing of her job is to document her decisions as an editor, as a translator. So yeah, and well, yes, and Anisa in the comments, she says, yes, I wonder if it would be possible to compare some alignment decisions between Georgian and Portuguese. Well, I hope so. We have a community. Yes. Yes, maybe, yes. That's why we need, and we started talking about that 2 years ago, that's why we need more data, yes, from Georgia, in the sense to understand more. Unfortunately, we don't know Georgian, and so to understand exactly what this means. And if we start producing this data, we can really understand the problems of the language and in general of languages. So that's why the work that you have been doing, Levan, is important, fundamental, and Maya now she's contributing to that.
Yes, I hope that our students will continue also this.
Yes, yes, we hope so, because it's important to have different. And one thing, because at the beginning you mentioned also that, if I understood correctly, these translations, so you have these different translations of Herodotus, also to use them in the school, in gymnasia. Did I understand correctly? So do you read Herodotus in school?
They used a Greek version in 19th century.
Okay, yes.
And it was used, not translations appear
later, of course.
Later.
So in the 19th century, Greek was taught in schools. Yeah, no, this is important.
Well, it was not so much, 3 or 4 schools in whole Georgia of this stage, but it was, of course, it was the same system as in Europe.
Yeah, well, yes, it's true, of course. Also, well, not everywhere Greek is taught in the high school, so this is important to know. So where, and so yes, of course, the system is similar, but not everywhere is taught Greek nowadays. Sometimes they want to cut Greek.
Everybody who was interested in Herodotus could read it in Greek. And
yes,
now
that's the thing, exactly.
Interested, but they can't.
That's why we need translations, because yes, in the past it was possible, and yeah.
In the 20th century there was no need of translation.
Yeah, and another question about the sources. So thank you for the last slides about the meaning of ethnos, which is a big, a very interesting topic. And the other question, so how is well, this is another big question, but the reliability of Herodotus for his descriptions of Georgia and the sources. Does he mention sources for his information? Well, with Herodotus,
he
always. Yeah.
He was in Colchis, and he has spoken with them, and for its argument for this Egyptian Colchian connections, that Egyptians don't know it, but didn't know about it, but Colchians know, and that's why Colchians are the Egyptian soldiers who are stayed there. Yeah. So he has seen it, and he has spoken with them, and from Colchis he has more or less adequate information, these phases and distances and so on. It's
is Herodotus, his research, his history, also in this case, also for these parts concerning modern Georgia, we can find the method of Herodotus, his Historia, yes, is research. So this is interesting. Okay, I think so. Now our time is over. But Levan, really, thank you very much, because it was very clear and very helpful, and also yes, very interesting for knowing something more about also Georgian and I'm happy to see this, because I was 3 years ago in Tbilisi, so I'm happy to see all. Sorry.
I hope you will come again.
I hope so, really, because Tbilisi is very, very interesting. I would also like to visit other parts of Georgia, and I was happy to see the community, because you have a strong community, many students, a strong tradition in classics. You have a great department of classics, I remember that. And you are working a lot also in the digital humanities. You are producing a lot, I see, in these 2 last years. You also have an important project for epigraphy. You showed that last year. So many things. I'm happy to see all these things happening. Okay, thank you very much, Levan. So your class outline is online in GitHub. We have your slides, so we can read them again, and also the YouTube video. So see you next week. Next week again, we will have Herodotus, but in another country, in Iran, because we will read Herodotus with Mariam Foradi in Tehran. So we go on with our trip with Herodotus. Okay, Levan, thank you very much. Good night and see you. Bye. Thank you.